Chapter 1. An Invitation to Murder. The rain fell in steady silvery sheets against the windows of Hercule Poirot's modest London apartment. The great detective sat at his breakfast table, his eggs perfectly soft-boiled, his toast cut into precise triangles, and his moustache waxed to a faultless point. He was reading Le Figaro when a sharp rap at the door interrupted his morning ritual. "Enter, if you please," Poirot called, his voice tinged with curiosity. His loyal friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, stepped in, a letter in hand. "Post for you, Poirot. Rather grand-looking, if you ask me." Poirot took the envelope, noting the heavy cream paper and the elegant looping script. He turned it over, examining the wax seal. A stylized W pressed into deep red. "Ah, mon ami, you see, already the day brings intrigue." He broke the seal and read aloud. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot, you are cordially invited to a dinner party at Weatherbe Hall this Saturday at 8 o'clock. Your presence is requested as a guest of honor. The evening promises stimulating company and conversation. Please RSVP at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Lady Agatha Weatherbe." Hastings whistled. "Weatherbe Hall? That's quite the estate. Lady Agatha is something of a legend in society circles." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Indeed, Hastings. And yet, why should Lady Agatha invite Hercule Poirot, the humble detective, to her table? There is more here than meets the eye." Hastings grinned. "Perhaps she's a fan of your little grey cells." Poirot smiled, but his mind was already at work. "Or perhaps, mon ami, she anticipates trouble. The English aristocracy does not summon detectives for idle chatter." He penned a swift reply, accepting the invitation. As he handed the letter to Hastings for posting, he mused aloud. "Tell me, Hastings, what do you know of Lady Agatha?" Hastings considered. "Widow of Lord Weatherbe. No children. Known for her charity work and her rather eccentric dinner parties. She's said to have a sharp tongue and a sharper mind." Poirot nodded. "And her guests? Always a mixed bag. Artists, politicians, old friends, new faces. She likes to stir the pot, so to speak." Poirot's moustache bristled with anticipation. "Then we must be prepared for anything. I have a feeling, Hastings, that this dinner party will be most eventful." Saturday evening arrived with a chill in the air. Weatherbe Hall loomed at the end of a long winding drive, its stone facade bathed in the golden glow of lanterns. Poirot and Hastings were greeted at the door by a solemn butler, who took their coats and led them through a maze of corridors to the drawing-room. The room was a study in opulence, velvet drapes, gilded mirrors, and a roaring fire. A handful of guests had already gathered, their voices low and polite, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Lady Agatha herself stood by the fireplace, a tall woman with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her eyes, bright and assessing, fixed on Poirot as he entered. "Monsieur Poirot, how delightful to finally meet you." The handshake was firm, her smile enigmatic. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Most agreeable, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Your hospitality is renowned." She laughed, a sound both warm and calculating. "I do try to keep things interesting. Allow me to introduce you to the other guests." Poirot and Hastings were soon mingling with the assembled company. Colonel Geoffrey March, a retired army man with a bristling moustache and a booming laugh. Miss Evelyn Harper, a sharp-eyed spinster with a passion for gossip. Mr. Lionel Drake, a nervous young solicitor. Mrs. Beatrice Linton, a glamorous widow with a penchant for pearls. Dr. Felix Monroe, a quiet, intense physician. Miss Clara Weatherbe, Lady Agatha's niece, pale and anxious. Mr. Simon Blackwood, a charming but secretive novelist. As the clock chimed 8, Lady Agatha clapped her hands. "Shall we proceed to dinner?" The guests filed into the dining room, where a table gleamed with crystal and silver. Poirot took his seat, his senses alert. He noted the glances exchanged, the undercurrents of tension, the way Lady Agatha's eyes lingered on each guest in turn. As the first course was served, Lady Agatha raised her glass. "To new friends and old secrets," she said, her voice ringing clear. Poirot sipped his wine, his mind already racing. He had the distinct feeling that beneath the surface of this elegant gathering, something dark and dangerous was waiting to emerge. "Hey, detective, quick question. Where in the world are you solving mysteries from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you want more twisted tales, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's case, it gets even creepier. Stay sharp." Chapter 2. The Guests Assemble. The grand dining room of Weatherbe Hall was a masterpiece of Edwardian elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished mahogany table, set with the finest china and silver. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the low hum of polite conversation. Poirot, ever the observer, took in every detail as he and Hastings entered, guided by the butler, Mr. Graves. Lady Agatha presided at the head of the table, her posture regal, her eyes missing nothing. She gestured for Poirot to sit at her right, a place of honor that did not go unnoticed by the other guests. "Mr. Poirot, I do hope you enjoy my little gatherings," Lady Agatha said, her tone light but her gaze sharp. "One never knows what the evening will bring." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, I am certain it will be most stimulating." The guests took their seats, each one studying contrasts. Colonel March, seated opposite Poirot, was already regaling Mrs. Linton with tales of his days in India, his voice booming across the table. Mrs. Linton, all diamonds and laughter, seemed to hang on his every word, though her eyes flickered restlessly to the other guests. Miss Evelyn Harper, thin and severe, sat beside Dr. Munro, who appeared more interested in his soup than in conversation. Miss Clara Weatherbe, Lady Agatha's niece, was pale and silent, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Mr. Lionel Drake, the young solicitor, sat at the far end, his gaze darting from face to face as if searching for approval. Mr. Simon Blackwood, the novelist, lounged in his chair, a half-smile playing on his lips as he observed the others. Hastings, seated beside Miss Harper, attempted to break the ice. "Splendid house, Lady Agatha. I imagine it has quite a history." Lady Agatha smiled. "Indeed, Captain Hastings, Weatherbe Hall has seen its share of triumphs and tragedies, but tonight I hope only for good company and lively conversation." Colonel March raised his glass. "To Lady Agatha, the finest hostess in England." A chorus of agreement followed, though Poirot noted the forced smiles and the quick sidelong glances. There was tension here, a web of secrets and old grievances. As the first course was cleared, Lady Agatha turned to Poirot. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you find English society very different from the continent?" Poirot smiled modestly. "Every country has its peculiarities, madame. But human nature, it is the same everywhere. The passions, the jealousies, the ambitions, they do not change." Mrs. Linton leaned in, her eyes sparkling. "And have you ever solved a case at a dinner party, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, madame, one must always be prepared for the unexpected. Even the most elegant setting can conceal a mystery." Miss Harper sniffed. "I should hope we are safe from such excitement tonight." Simon Blackwood chuckled. "You never know, Miss Harper. Life has a way of surprising us." Lady Agatha's eyes lingered on her guests, her expression unreadable. "Indeed, Mr. Blackwood, surprises are the spice of life." The conversation turned to art and literature, with Blackwood holding forth on the latest trends in the novel. Poirot listened, but his attention was divided. He watched Clara Weatherbe, who seemed on the verge of tears, and noted the way Dr. Munro's eyes flickered to her with concern. He observed the subtle tension between Colonel March and Mr. Drake, the way Mrs. Linton's laughter rang a little too loudly, the way Lady Agatha's gaze swept the table, missing nothing. As the main course was served, Poirot leaned toward Lady Agatha. "You have assembled a most interesting group, madame. Old friends or new acquaintances?" "A mixture of both," Lady Agatha replied. "Some I have known for years, others are more recent additions. I find variety keeps things lively." Poirot nodded. "And yet there is a certain undercurrent? Forgive me, but I sense not all is as harmonious as it appears." Lady Agatha's smile was enigmatic. "You are very perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. But tonight is for celebration, not for old wounds." Poirot inclined his head, but his mind was racing. There was a story here, a tapestry of relationships and resentments. He resolved to learn more before the night was through. As dessert was served, the conversation grew more animated. Colonel March recounted a hunting mishap. Mrs. Linton flirted shamelessly with Blackwood, and Miss Harper offered biting commentary on the state of modern manners. Poirot watched, listened, and filed away every detail. At last, Lady Agatha rose. "Should we retire to the drawing-room for coffee and liqueurs?" The guests stood, chairs scraping on the polished floor. Poirot offered his arm to Lady Agatha, and together they led the way. As they entered the drawing-room, Poirot caught a glimpse of Clara Weatherbe slipping away down a side corridor, her face pale and drawn. Dr. Munro hesitated, then followed her, his expression troubled. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The evening was only just beginning, but already the shadows were gathering. He turned to Hastings, who had joined him by the fire. "You see, mon ami, already there are secrets in the air." Hastings grinned. "You're imagining things, Poirot. It's just a dinner party." Poirot smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Perhaps. But I have learned, Hastings, that where there are secrets, there is often danger." As the guests settled with their coffee, laughter and conversation resumed. But Poirot could not shake the feeling that beneath the surface something dark was stirring, something that would soon shatter the calm of Weatherbe Hall. Chapter 3. A Toast to Secrets. The drawing-room of Weatherbe Hall was alive with the gentle clink of porcelain cups and the low murmur of conversation. Poirot, ever the observer, took his coffee black and sipped it slowly, his eyes moving from guest to guest. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the rain outside had grown heavier, drumming a steady rhythm against the tall windows. Lady Agatha, resplendent in a deep burgundy gown, presided over the gathering with practised ease. She moved from group to group, her laughter ringing out, her words always just a shade too clever. Poirot watched her closely, noting the way her gaze lingered on her niece Clara, who had returned to the room with Dr. Munro at her side. Clara's cheeks were flushed, her eyes downcast, and Dr. Munro hovered protectively near her, his manner tense. Colonel March, glass in hand, was deep in conversation with Mr. Drake, the young solicitor. Their voices were low, but Poirot caught snatches of their exchange. "I tell you, Drake, the old ways are best," March insisted, his tone gruff. "All this modern nonsense, progress for progress's sake. It's not to be trusted." Drake smiled nervously. "Perhaps, Colonel, but times do change. We must adapt, mustn't we?" March harumphed, clearly unconvinced. Across the room, Mrs. Linton and Simon Blackwood were engaged in a flirtatious repartee. Mrs. Linton's laughter was bright, but Poirot noticed the way her fingers trembled as she lifted her glass. Blackwood, for his part, seemed amused by everything and everyone, his eyes glinting with mischief. Miss Harper, seated near the fire, was knitting with fierce concentration. She glanced up occasionally, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Lady Agatha clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention. "My dear friends, before we retire for the evening, I propose a toast." The guests gathered around, glasses raised. Lady Agatha's eyes sparkled as she spoke. "To secrets," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "For what is life without a little mystery? May we always have the courage to face the truth that we hide, and the wisdom to forgive the secrets of others." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. Poirot saw Clara's hand tighten on her glass, and Dr. Monroe's jaw clench. Colonel March looked away, and Mrs. Linton's smile faltered for just a moment. Simon Blackwood broke the tension with a laugh. "Here, here, to secrets, and to the delightful company in which we keep them." The guests drank, some with enthusiasm, others with reluctance. Poirot set his glass down and addressed Lady Agatha. "You have a gift for words, madame, but I wonder, do you believe all secrets should come to light?" Lady Agatha's eyes met his, and for a moment something hard and cold flickered in their depths. "Not all, Monsieur Poirot. Some secrets are best left buried, but others, well, they have a way of revealing themselves, whether we wish it or not." Miss Harper sniffed. "I, for one, have nothing to hide." Mrs. Linton arched an eyebrow. "How very dull for you, Miss Harper." Colonel March chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "We all have skeletons in our closets, eh, Agatha?" Lady Agatha smiled thinly. "Some more than others, Geoffrey." Poirot sensed the undercurrent swirling beneath the surface. He turned to Clara, who sat silent and pale. "Mademoiselle, you seem unwell. Perhaps some fresh air." Clara shook her head. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I'm quite all right." Dr. Monroe interjected, his voice gentle. "Clara has had a trying week. The anniversary of her parents' accident, you see." Lady Agatha's expression softened. "Of course. Forgive me, Clara. I should not have insisted you join us tonight." Clara managed a wan smile. "It's all right, Aunt Agatha." Poirot filed this information away. The anniversary of a tragedy. Such things often brought old wounds to the surface. As the evening wore on, the guests began to drift away, some to the card table, others to the piano. Poirot found himself beside Hastings, who was watching the room with interest. "Well, Poirot, what do you make of them?" Hastings asked quietly. Poirot smiled. "They are a fascinating collection, mon ami. Each one carries a secret, I think. The question is, whose secret will prove deadly?" Hastings frowned. "You don't really think?" Poirot held up a hand. "I think, Hastings, that Lady Agatha's toast was more than mere words. There is tension here, a sense of something unresolved. We must keep our eyes open." At that moment, the butler entered, his face grave. "Lady Agatha, the storm has worsened. The telephone lines are down, and the bridge over the river is flooded. I'm afraid no one will be able to leave tonight." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Agatha smiled, but her eyes were troubled. "Well, It seems we are to be each other's company for the night. Let us make the best of it." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the storm raged outside. Whatever secrets Weatherbe Hall held, they would not remain hidden for long. As the clock struck 11, Poirot felt a chill, not from the storm, but from the sense that something terrible was about to unfold. Chapter 4. A Sudden Death. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the corridors of Weatherbe Hall. The storm outside had reached a fever pitch, wind howling and rain lashing against the windows. Inside, the guests had splintered into smaller groups, the earlier camaraderie replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to thrum in the very air. Poirot, ever vigilant, sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, his eyes half closed, but his mind alert. Hastings was at the card table with Colonel March and Mr. Drake, the three men engaged in a desultory game of whist. Mrs. Linton and Simon Blackwood were at the piano, their laughter forced as they played a duet. Miss Harper had retired early, claiming a headache, and Dr. Munro was nowhere to be seen. Lady Agatha, however, remained in the drawing-room, her posture regal as she sipped a glass of sherry. She watched her guests with a hawk's gaze, as if daring them to break the fragile peace. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the uneasy calm. The guests froze. Poirot was the first to react, rising swiftly and moving toward the source of the sound, a corridor leading to the guest bedrooms. Hastings and Colonel March followed, their faces pale. They found Clara Weatherbe standing in the hallway, her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with terror. At her feet lay Dr. Munro, sprawled on the carpet, his face ashen and his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise and gentle. He checked for a pulse, though he already knew the answer. Dr. Munro was dead. Lady Agatha arrived, her face set in grim lines. "What has happened?" Poirot stood, his expression grave. "Dr. Munro is dead, madame. I believe he has been murdered." A collective gasp rippled through the group. Mrs. Linton clutched at Simon Blackwood's arm, her face straining of colour. Colonel March's jaw tightened, and Mr. Drake looked as if he might faint. Poirot turned to Clara, who was trembling violently. "Mademoiselle, please, tell us what you saw." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I was going to my room. I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, I saw Dr. Munro. He looked strange. He tried to speak, but then he just collapsed. I screamed." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. He examined the body more closely, noting a faint bitter smell on Dr. Munro's lips. Poison, perhaps? He would need to be certain. Lady Agatha's voice was icy. "Who would do such a thing? In my house?" Poirot looked around at the assembled guests. "That, madame, is what we must discover. Until we do, I suggest no one leaves this room." Colonel March bristled. "Are you suggesting one of us?" Poirot raised a hand. "I suggest nothing, Colonel, but the facts are these. Dr. Munro is dead. The storm has cut us off from the outside world, and the murderer is almost certainly among us." A heavy silence fell. Poirot turned to the butler, Mr. Graves. "Please, fetch the housekeeper, and have her remain with the body. No one is to touch anything until I have finished my examination." Graves nodded and hurried away. Poirot addressed the group. "Now I must ask you all some questions. Where was everyone in the last half hour?" Mrs. Linton spoke first, her voice trembling. "Simon and I were at the piano. We never left the drawing-room." Simon Blackwood nodded. "That's right. We were together the whole time." Colonel March gestured to the card table. "Drake, Hastings and I were playing cards. Ask them." Mr. Drake managed a shaky nod. "Yes, we were here." Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Miss Harper retired early. She's in her room." Poirot's gaze lingered on Clara. "And you, mademoiselle?" Clara shook her head. "I was in the drawing-room until a few minutes ago. I went to fetch a book from my room. That's when I found Doctor." Munro Poirot considered. "And Lady Agatha?" Lady Agatha's chin lifted. "I have not left this room all evening." Poirot nodded, filing away each alibi. He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, will you accompany me to examine Dr. Munro's room? There may be clues." Hastings agreed, and together they left the others under Lady Agatha's watchful eye. The corridor was dimly lit, the storm outside casting eerie shadows on the walls. Poirot entered Dr. Munro's room, his gaze sweeping over the neat, orderly space. On the bedside table was a glass of water, half finished, and a small bottle of sleeping tablets. Poirot examined the bottle. "Only a few tablets missing, not enough to kill a man." He sniffed the glass, detecting the same bitter scent as before. "Poison, Hastings. But how was it administered, and by whom?" Hastings frowned. Could it have been suicide? Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. Dr. Munro was not a man in despair, and the manner of his death, so sudden, so dramatic, it speaks of murder." He glanced around the room, noting a letter on the writing desk. He picked it up, scanning the contents. It was addressed to Clara Weatherbe. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Interesting. Dr. Munro was writing to Clara, but what was he trying to say? He pocketed the letter and turned to Hastings. "Come, let us return. The murderer is among us, and I intend to find them before the night is through." As they made their way back to the drawing-room, Poirot felt the weight of the storm pressing in. The game had begun, and the stakes were life and death. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. The drawing-room was thick with tension when Poirot and Hastings returned. The guests had clustered together, their faces pale and anxious, their voices hushed. Lady Agatha stood apart, her back straight, her eyes cold and calculating as she watched Poirot's every move. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Mesdames et messieurs, I must ask for your patience and your cooperation. Dr. Munro's death was not natural. I believe he was poisoned, and the means and opportunity must be established." Colonel March bristled. "Do you mean to say one of us is a murderer, Poirot?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "The facts, Colonel, speak for themselves. The storm has isolated us. No one could have entered or left Weatherbe Hall tonight. The murderer is here, among us." A shiver ran through the group. Mrs. Linton clutched her pearls, her eyes darting from face to face. Simon Blackwood, usually so composed, now looked unsettled. Miss Harper, who had rejoined the group after being summoned by Lady Agatha, sat rigidly in her chair, her knitting forgotten in her lap. Poirot turned to Mr. Graves, the butler. "Mr. Graves, please ensure that all doors and windows are locked. No one is to leave the house or their rooms without my knowledge." Graves bowed. "Very good, sir." Poirot addressed the guests. "I must examine Dr. Munro's room more thoroughly. I ask that you all remain here together until I return. Lady Agatha, will you oversee this?" Lady Agatha inclined her head. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. No one will leave my sight." Poirot and Hastings made their way back to the guest corridor. The storm's fury had not abated. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the wind rattled the window panes. Poirot paused outside Dr. Munro's door, which was now guarded by the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch. "Has anyone entered the room since we left, madame?" Poirot asked. Mrs. Finch shook her head. "No, sir. I've been here the whole time." Poirot nodded and entered the room, Hastings close behind. He began a meticulous search, his eyes missing nothing. The glass of water still sat on the bedside table, the bottle of sleeping tablets beside it. Poirot examined the glass again, then turned his attention to the writing desk. He opened the drawers, finding nothing unusual. Stationery, a fountain pen, a few personal effects. But in the wastebasket, he found a torn scrap of paper. He pieced it together, revealing a single word: "Forgive." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Curious, Hastings. Dr. Munro was writing something, perhaps a note to Clara. But why tear it up?" Hastings frowned. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he changed his mind. Or perhaps someone else did not want the note to be found, Poirot mused. He moved to the wardrobe, opening it to reveal neatly hung suits and a small locked box on the shelf. Poirot examined the box, noting the initials FM engraved on the lid. "Locked," Hastings observed. Poirot smiled faintly, but not for long. He produced a small set of picks from his pocket and deftly opened the box. Inside were several letters, all addressed to Dr. Munro, and a photograph of a young woman, Clara Weatherbe. Poirot studied the letters, his brow furrowing. "These are love letters, Hastings." "From Clara to Dr. Munro." Hastings whistled softly. "So they were involved?" "It would seem so. But why keep the letters locked away? And why was Dr. Munro writing to Clara tonight?" Poirot replaced the letters and closed the box. He turned his attention to the window, which was latched from the inside. He examined the sill, finding no signs of tampering. He returned to the bedside table, lifting the glass and sniffing it again. "The poison was in the water, I am certain." "But who brought it to him?" Hastings shrugged. "Could he have poured it himself?" Poirot shook his head. "Perhaps, but the timing is odd. Clara found him in the corridor, not in his room. He must have left his room after drinking the water." He glanced at the door, then at the corridor beyond. "Let us retrace his steps, Hastings." They stepped into the hallway, Poirot's eyes scanning the carpet for any sign of disturbance. He knelt, examining a faint stain near where Dr. Munro had fallen. "Spilled water," Poirot murmured. "He must have carried the glass with him." He stood, deep in thought. Why would a man, feeling the effects of poison, leave his room? Unless he was going to meet someone or deliver a message. Hastings looked uneasy. "You think he was trying to warn someone?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps he was summoned." Poirot straightened, his expression resolute. "We must speak to Clara. She may know more than she realizes." They returned to the drawing-room, where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Poirot approached Clara, who looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Mademoiselle, may I speak with you privately?" Clara nodded, rising shakily to her feet. Poirot led her to a quiet corner, Hastings standing discreetly nearby. "Clara," Poirot said gently, "I must ask you about your relationship with Dr. Munro." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "We were close. He was kind to me, when no one else was. But Aunt Agatha disapproved. She said he was beneath our station." Poirot nodded. "Did you see Dr. Munro tonight, before he died?" Clara shook her head. "Number I wanted to, but I was afraid. I thought Aunt Agatha would find out." Poirot studied her face. "Did Dr. Munro send you a note tonight?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, he asked me to meet him in the corridor, but I was too frightened. I stayed in the drawing-room until I thought it was safe. When I went to my room, I found him dead. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did anyone else know about your meeting?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so." Poirot thanked her and returned to Hastings. "The plot thickens, mon ami. Dr. Munro was lured from his room, poisoned, and left to die in the corridor. The murderer is clever, but not clever enough for Hercule Poirot." He turned to the assembled guests, his voice calm but commanding. "No one is to leave their rooms tonight. In the morning, I will continue my investigation. Until then, I suggest you all reflect on what secrets you may be keeping. For secrets, as Lady Agatha said, have a way of coming to light." As the guests dispersed, Poirot stood by the fire, his mind racing. The locked room, the poisoned glass, the secret love affair. Each piece of the puzzle was falling into place. But the picture was not yet complete. He glanced at Hastings, who was watching him with concern. "Do you think the murderer will strike again, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes were grave. "I do not know, Hastings, but I intend to be ready." Outside the storm raged on, and within the walls of Weatherbe Hall the shadows deepened. Chapter 6. Suspicions and Alibis. Morning came reluctantly to Weatherbe Hall, the storm clouds still heavy and low, casting a grey pallor over the estate. The rain had eased, but the grounds were sodden, and the river still raged, making escape impossible. The guests gathered in the breakfast-room, their faces drawn and weary, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on them. Poirot entered, immaculate as ever, his eyes sharp and alert. Hastings followed, looking more sombre than usual. Lady Agatha presided at the head of the table, her composure unshaken, though her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Good morning, mes amis," Poirot greeted, his tone gentle but firm. "I trust you all managed some rest, despite the circumstances." A murmur of assent followed, though no one met his gaze. Poirot took his place at the table, folding his hands. "Before we begin, I must ask you all to remain here. I will speak to each of you in turn. The truth, it is like the sun. It cannot be hidden forever." Lady Agatha nodded. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. We are at your disposal." Poirot began with Colonel March, inviting him to a small study adjacent to the breakfast-room. The colonel entered, his military bearing intact, though his eyes were wary. "Colonel March," Poirot began, "you were playing cards with Captain Hastings and Mr. Drake at the time of Dr. Munro's death. Can you confirm this?" March nodded. "Yes, we played 3 hands. I never left the table." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And your relationship with Dr. Munro?" March's jaw tightened. "We had our differences. He was a good doctor, but I didn't care for his politics. Still, I had no reason to wish him harm." Poirot nodded, making a note. "Thank you, Colonel." Next he called Mr. Drake, who entered nervously, his hands twisting a handkerchief. "Mr. Drake, you were also at the card table." Drake nodded. "Yes, with Colonel March and Captain Hastings. I hardly knew Dr. Munro. We only spoke once or twice." Poirot regarded him steadily. "You seemed anxious last night. Is there something you wish to tell me?" Drake shook his head. "No, nothing. I don't like this sort of thing." Poirot dismissed him, then called Mrs. Linton. She swept in, her perfume preceding her, her manner brittle. "Mrs. Linton, you and Mr. Blackwood were at the piano." She smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. "Yes, we played a duet. I never left his side." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And your acquaintance with Dr. Munro?" She shrugged. "He was a quiet man. I barely noticed him." Poirot let her go, then summoned Simon Blackwood. The novelist entered, his usual charm subdued. "Mr. Blackwood, you confirm Mrs. Linton's account?" He nodded. "We played until the scream. I have no reason to lie, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot leaned forward. "You observe people for a living, Mr. Blackwood. Did you notice anything unusual last night?" Blackwood hesitated. Clara seemed frightened. Dr. Monroe was tense, and Lady Agatha, she was watching everyone as if waiting for something to happen. Poirot smiled faintly. "Merci, monsieur." Miss Harper was next, her lips pursed, her knitting in hand. "Miss Harper, you retired early?" She nodded. "I suffer from migraines. I was in my room, reading. I heard the commotion, but did not leave until Lady Agatha sent for me." Poirot regarded her. "Did you see or hear anything unusual?" She shook her head. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I keep to myself." Poirot thanked her and called Clara. The young woman entered, her eyes red-rimmed. "Clara, I must ask again, did anyone know of your meeting with Dr. Monroe?" She shook her head. "Number I told no one." Poirot's voice softened. "Did you see anyone in the corridor before you found Dr. Monroe?" Clara hesitated. "I thought I heard footsteps, but I was so frightened. I can't be sure." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, mademoiselle." Finally, Poirot turned to Lady Agatha. She met his gaze unflinchingly. "Lady Agatha, you have been most helpful, but I must ask, did you know of Clara's relationship with Dr. Monroe?" Lady Agatha's lips thinned. "I suspected. I did not approve. Clara is my responsibility, and I will not see her make a mistake." Poirot inclined his head. "Did you see or hear anything last night?" She shook her head. "Number I was in the drawing-room the entire time." Poirot thanked her and returned to the breakfast-room, where the guests waited in uneasy silence. He addressed them all. "Each of you has an alibi, yet Dr. Monroe is dead. The poison was administered in his room, but he died in the corridor. Someone here is lying, or someone found a way to act unseen." Colonel March bristled. "Are you accusing us all, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes were cold. "I accuse no one, yet, but I will find the truth. The murderer made a mistake, and I will discover it." He turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, we must examine the staff's movements. Sometimes the smallest detail is the key." As Poirot and Hastings left the room, the guests exchanged uneasy glances. The web of suspicion had tightened, and no one felt safe. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside Weatherbe Hall, the real tempest was only beginning. Chapter 7. The Butler's Tale. Poirot and Hastings made their way through the quiet corridors of Weatherbe Hall, the hush broken only by the distant ticking of clocks and the occasional creak of old floorboards. The storm had left the house in a state of uneasy calm, as if the very walls were holding their breath. They found Mr. Graves, the butler, in the pantry, meticulously polishing a row of silver candlesticks. He straightened at their approach, his expression impassive, but his eyes wary. "Mr. Graves," Poirot began, "may we have a word?" "Of course, sir." Graves set aside his cloth and gestured for them to sit at a small table in the corner. Poirot took the seat, folding his hands. "You have served the Weatherbe family for many years, I believe?" 23, sir. Since before the late Lord Weatherbe passed." Poirot nodded. "You know the household well, then? Tell me, Mr. Graves, what did you observe last night?" Graves hesitated, glancing at Hastings before replying. "It was a difficult evening, sir. The storm, the guests. There was a tension in the air. I noticed it at dinner, and it only grew worse as the night went on." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you see Dr. Monroe after dinner?" Graves nodded. "Yes, sir. He asked for a glass of water to be brought to his room. I sent Mary, the maid, to deliver it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "At what time was this?" "Shortly after 10, sir. I remember because the clock in the hall had just chimed." Poirot made a note. And did you see anyone else in the guest corridor around that time? Graves shook his head. No, sir. I was in the kitchen, overseeing the staff. But Mary returned quickly. She said Dr. Munro thanked her and seemed in good spirits. Poirot considered this. And the other guests? Did any of them request anything unusual? Graves pursed his lips. Miss Harper asked for a pot of tea to be sent to her room. Mrs. Linton wanted a hot water bottle, otherwise nothing out of the ordinary. Hastings interjected. Did you notice anyone acting strangely? Graves hesitated. If I may speak freely, sir, Lady Agatha was more on edge than usual. She kept asking after Miss Clara, and she seemed preoccupied. Poirot nodded. Thank you, Mr. Graves. One more thing. Are the staff loyal to Lady Agatha? Graves straightened. Absolutely, sir. She is a fair employer. We would do nothing to harm her or her guests. Poirot smiled. I do not doubt it. May I speak with Mary? Graves nodded and left to fetch the maid. A few minutes later, Mary entered, her hands nervously twisting her apron. Mary, Poirot said kindly, you brought Dr. Munro his water last night. Yes, sir. He was writing at his desk when I entered. He thanked me and said he would ring if he needed anything else. Did you notice anything unusual in his room? Mary shook her head. No, sir. Everything was tidy. He seemed tired, perhaps, but not unwell. Poirot regarded her. Did you see anyone else in the corridor? Mary hesitated. I thought I heard someone in the next room. Miss Clara's, I think, but I didn't see anyone. Poirot nodded. Thank you, Mary. You have been most helpful. As Mary left, Poirot turned to Hastings. The glass of water was delivered by Mary, but the poison could have been added before or after. The question is, who had access? Hastings frowned. Anyone could have slipped into Dr. Munro's room if the door was unlocked. Just so, Hastings. But the staff are loyal, and Mary saw nothing amiss. The murderer is clever, but not invisible. They returned to the main hall, where Mr. Graves awaited them. Is there anything else, sir? Poirot considered. One last question, Mr. Graves. Were any keys missing from the house last night? Graves shook his head. No, sir. I checked them myself before retiring. Poirot thanked him and turned to Hastings. The locked room, the poisoned glass, the secret note, each piece is important. But there is something we are missing, mon ami, something small but vital. Hastings looked puzzled. What do you mean, Poirot? Poirot smiled. The murderer relied on routine, on the trust of the household. But in every crime there is a moment of carelessness. We must find it. As they walked back toward the drawing-room, Poirot paused, his eyes thoughtful. Let us speak to Miss Clara again. I believe she holds the key to this mystery, though she may not know it herself. They found Clara in the library, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. She turned as they entered, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot. Poirot approached gently. Mademoiselle, I must ask, did you leave your room at any point after dinner, before you found Dr. Munro? Clara shook her head. Number Y was too afraid. I only left when I thought everyone was asleep. Poirot nodded. And did you see anyone in the corridor? She hesitated. I thought I heard voices. 2 people arguing, but I couldn't make out what they said. Poirot's eyes lit up. Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped more than you know. As they left the library, Hastings whispered, What do you think, Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth, Hastings, is like a seed. It grows even in darkness. Soon it will break through. The butler's tale had added another thread to the tangled web. Poirot felt the pieces shifting, aligning. The answer was close. He could feel it. Chapter 8. A clue in the garden. The rain had finally eased, leaving the gardens of Weatherbe Hall glistening and sodden under a pale, uncertain sun. Poirot, ever meticulous, donned his overcoat and galoshes before venturing outside. Hastings, less enthusiastic about the mud, followed with a resigned sigh. "Why the garden, Poirot?" Hastings asked, glancing at the puddles with distaste. Poirot smiled, his eyes scanning the grounds. "Because, mon ami, murderers are like gardeners. They try to bury their secrets, but sometimes the earth gives them up." They walked along the gravel path, the air fresh and sharp after the storm. The flower beds were battered, petals strewn across the lawn. Poirot paused near a rose bush, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Look, Hastings," he said quietly. Hastings peered down. In the soft earth beneath the bush, a set of muddy footprints led away from the house, then doubled back. Poirot knelt, examining them closely. "These are not the prints of a gardener," he murmured. "Too small. And see here." He pointed to a faint impression near the edge of the path. "A woman's shoe, I think, and recent." Hastings frowned. "But who would be out here in the storm?" Poirot straightened, brushing the mud from his gloves. "Someone with something to hide, or something to retrieve." They followed the trail, which led to a small stone bench beneath an ancient yew tree. There, half buried in the wet earth, Poirot spotted a glint of metal. He bent and carefully unearthed a delicate silver locket, its chain broken. He opened it, revealing a faded photograph of Clara Weatherbe, and opposite, a lock of dark hair. Hastings whistled. Clara's locket, but why would it be out here? Poirot's eyes narrowed. "That is the question, Hastings, and look." He pointed to a scrap of paper, sodden but still legible, caught in the roots of the yew. He retrieved it and read aloud. "Meet me in the garden after dinner. We must talk. F. F for Felix Monroe," Hastings said softly. Poirot nodded. "It seems Dr. Monroe arranged a meeting with Clara here, not in the corridor, as we thought." Hastings looked troubled. "But Clara said she never left her room." Poirot's gaze was thoughtful. "Perhaps she did not. Or perhaps she is protecting someone." They returned to the house, Poirot carefully wrapping the locket and note in his handkerchief. In the drawing-room, the guests were gathered, their faces tense, as Poirot entered. "Lady Agatha," Poirot began, "may I have a word with Miss Clara?" Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Clara rose, her hands trembling as Poirot showed her the locket. "Is this yours, mademoiselle?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I lost it last night. I thought it was in my room." Poirot handed her the note. "And this?" She read it, her lips trembling. "Dr. Monroe. He wanted to meet me in the garden, but I was too frightened. I never went." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Are you certain, Clara?" "The footprints suggest someone was there." Clara shook her head. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I stayed in my room. I heard voices outside, but I was too afraid to go." Poirot studied her face, then turned to Lady Agatha. "Did you know of this meeting?" Lady Agatha's expression was unreadable. "Number, but I suspected something was amiss. Clara has been restless for days." Poirot nodded, then addressed the room. "Someone was in the garden last night, and they dropped this locket. If it was not Clara, then who?" Mrs. Linton spoke up, her voice brittle. "Anyone could have taken it. The doors are never locked." Colonel March grunted. "But who would risk the storm?" Simon Blackwood, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "Perhaps someone desperate, or someone with something to lose." Poirot's eyes swept the room. "The truth is coming to light, mes amis. The garden has given up its secret. Now we must see who will confess." He turned to Hastings as the guests murmured among themselves. "The locket, the note, the footprints, each points to a meeting that never happened. Or did it? The murderer is growing nervous, Hastings. Soon they will make a mistake." Hastings nodded, his face grim. "What will you do now, Poirot?" Poirot smiled, his eyes alight with purpose. "Now, mon ami, we wait. The guilty cannot hide forever, not from Hercule Poirot." As the sun struggled through the clouds, Poirot felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. The garden had yielded its clue, and the endgame was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Unravelling Web. The atmosphere in Weatherbe Hall had grown taut, as if the very walls were listening. Poirot's discovery in the garden had unsettled the guests, and suspicion now hung over the breakfast table like a thick fog. Lady Agatha presided with icy composure, but her eyes flickered with unease. Clara sat pale and silent, clutching her recovered locket as if it were a talisman. The others, Colonel March, Mrs. Linton, Simon Blackwood, Miss Harper, and Mr. Drake, watched each other with open wariness. Poirot, ever the conductor of this 10th symphony, stood and addressed the room. "Mesdames et messieurs, the time has come to speak plainly. The events of last night are not isolated. They are the result of secrets, old and new, woven together in a web of jealousy, fear, and love." He paused, letting his words settle. "I have spoken with each of you. I have listened to your stories, your alibis, your denials. But the truth, it resists concealment. Let us examine the threads of this web." He turned first to Clara. "Mademoiselle, you say you did not go to the garden, yet your locket was found there, along with a note from Dr. Monroe. If you did not go, then someone else did, someone who wished to implicate you, or perhaps to retrieve something you had lost." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I never left my room." Poirot nodded, then faced Lady Agatha. "Madame, you have been most protective of your niece. You disapproved of her relationship with Dr. Monroe. Did you know of the note?" Lady Agatha's lips thinned. But I would have stopped her if I had." Poirot's gaze swept the table. "Colonel March, you and Dr. Monroe had your differences. Did you see him after dinner?" March shook his head, his jaw set. "I was with Hastings and Drake the whole time." Poirot turned to Mrs. Linton and Simon Blackwood. "You were together at the piano. Did either of you leave the room?" Mrs. Linton's eyes flashed. "We played until the scream." Blackwood nodded. "We never left each other's sight." Poirot's attention shifted to Miss Harper. "You retired early, yet the staff say you requested tea. Did you see anyone in the corridor?" Miss Harper's knitting needles clicked together. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I heard voices, but I did not investigate." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And Mr. Drake, you seemed nervous last night. Is there something you wish to confess?" Drake's face reddened. I was only nervous because of the storm. I have nothing to hide." Poirot let the silence stretch, watching each face. "There is more to this than meets the eye. The footprints in the garden suggest a woman, but not necessarily Clara. The locket could have been planted. The note could have been intercepted." He turned to Lady Agatha. "Madam, you said the doors are never locked. Who else could have entered the garden?" Lady Agatha hesitated. "Any of the guests or the staff, I suppose?" Poirot nodded. "And yet the staff have no motive. The motive lies here among us." He addressed the group. "Let us consider the relationships. Dr. Monroe and Clara were in love, but Lady Agatha disapproved. Colonel March resented Dr. Monroe's politics. Mrs. Linton and Simon Blackwood were both outsiders. but perhaps not as uninvolved as they seem. Miss Harper keeps to herself, but she hears much. Mr. Drake is nervous, perhaps hiding something." Poirot's voice grew sharper. "And then there is the matter of the poison. It was administered in Dr. Monro's room in a glass of water, delivered by Mary the maid, but anyone could have slipped in and tampered with it before or after." He paused, letting the tension build. "The murderer is clever, but not infallible. There is a thread, one small overlooked detail, that will unravel the entire web." At that moment, Mr. Graves entered, his face grave. "Monsieur Poirot, may I have a word?" Poirot excused himself and followed Graves into the hall. The butler spoke in a low voice. "Sir, I found this in the scullery this morning." He handed Poirot a small empty vial, its label smudged but still legible. "Digitalis." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Mr. Graves, you have done well." He returned to the breakfast-room, holding the vial aloft. "Behold, mes amis, the murder weapon, digitalis, a powerful poison, easily slipped into a glass of water." A gasp rippled through the room. Poirot's gaze swept the guests. "Who among you had access to this? Who among you is familiar with its use?" All eyes turned to Lady Agatha, who paled but held her ground. "I keep a medicine cabinet, but it is locked. Only I and Dr. Monro had the key." Poirot's voice was soft but deadly. "Then the murderer is someone who could obtain that key. Someone who knew Dr. Monro's habits. Someone who wished to end his life, and perhaps frame another." He looked at each guest in turn. "The web is unraveling. The truth is close, and soon the murderer will be revealed." The room was silent, the tension unbearable. Poirot's little grey cells were working furiously, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Chapter 10. Poirot's little grey cells. The breakfast-room was thick with anticipation. Poirot stood at the head of the table, the small vial of digitalis glinting in his hand. The guests watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination, as if he were both judge and executioner. Hastings, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. "Poirot, do you really believe the murderer is still among us?" Poirot's eyes never left the guests. "But of course, Hastings. The murderer is here, in this very room. The question is not if, but who." He set the vial on the table with a deliberate gesture. "Let us review, mes amis. Dr. Monro was poisoned with digitalis, a substance kept in Lady Agatha's locked medicine cabinet. Only she and Dr. Monro had keys. The poison was administered in a glass of water, delivered by Mary the maid, but anyone could have tampered with it before it reached Dr. Monro's room." He began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider the motives. Lady Agatha, you disapproved of Dr. Monro's relationship with your niece. Colonel March, you resented Dr. Monro's politics. Mrs. Linton and Mr. Blackwood, you are outsiders, but perhaps you saw or heard something you have not shared. Miss Harper, you keep to yourself, but you are observant. Mr. Drake, you are nervous, perhaps hiding a secret." Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But the key, I think, lies in the relationships. Dr. Monro and Clara were in love, but their relationship was forbidden. Lady Agatha, you wished to protect your niece, but at what cost?" Lady Agatha's face was pale, but her voice was steady. "I would never harm Felix. I only wanted what was best for Clara." Poirot nodded. "And yet the locket and the note suggest someone wished to implicate Clara, or perhaps to protect her." He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle, you insist you never left your room. Yet your locket was found in the garden, along with a note from Dr. Monro. If you did not go, then someone else did." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I am telling the truth." Poirot's voice softened. "I believe you, mademoiselle, but someone is lying." He turned to the others. Colonel March, you were at the card table. Mrs. Linton and Mr. Blackwood, you were at the piano. Miss Harper, you were in your room. Mr. Drake, you were also at the card table. All have alibis, yet Dr. Munro is dead." He picked up the vial again. The murderer needed access to the medicine cabinet. Only Lady Agatha and Dr. Munro had keys. But what if someone else obtained a key? Or what if the cabinet was left unlocked, even for a moment? He looked at Lady Agatha. "Madam, did you ever leave the cabinet unlocked?" Lady Agatha hesitated. I may have, once or twice, but only briefly." Poirot nodded. That was all the opportunity the murderer needed. He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, do you recall what Mary the maid said? She heard voices in the corridor, 2 people arguing, and Clara heard the same." Hastings nodded. "Yes, she did." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The murderer met Dr. Munro in the corridor, perhaps to confront him. An argument ensued. The murderer, desperate, slipped the poison into his water, knowing he would drink it before bed. He looked at each guest in turn. But who had the strongest motive? Who stood to lose the most if Dr. Munro and Clara married? All eyes turned to Lady Agatha, but Poirot shook his head. "No, not Lady Agatha. She's protective, yes, but not a murderer." He turned to Miss Harper. "You, mademoiselle, are a keen observer. Did you see anything unusual?" Miss Harper's lips tightened. "I saw Mrs. Linton in the corridor, just before the scream. She was coming from the direction of Dr. Munro's room." Mrs. Linton gasped. "That's a lie. I was in the drawing-room with Simon." Simon Blackwood looked startled. "You did leave for a few minutes, Beatrice. You said you needed some air." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, Mr. Blackwood. The truth emerges. Mrs. Linton, you had the opportunity. But what was your motive?" Mrs. Linton's face crumpled. I didn't mean to hurt him. I only wanted to frighten him, to make him leave Clara alone. I thought if he became ill, Lady Agatha would send him away. I never meant for him to die." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "But digitalis is a dangerous poison, madame. Even a small dose can be fatal." Mrs. Linton buried her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I only wanted to protect Clara. I thought I was doing the right thing." Poirot nodded. "The road to hell, madame, is paved with good intentions." He turned to the others. "The murderer has confessed. Justice will be served." The room was silent, the tension broken at last. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed once again. Hastings exhaled, relief on his face. "You did it, Poirot. You solved the case." Poirot smiled, his eyes twinkling. "It was not I, Hastings, but the truth itself. It always finds a way." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting Weatherbe Hall in a golden light. Inside, the web of secrets had finally unraveled. Chapter 11. A second shock. The confession of Mrs. Linton had left the guests in stunned silence. Lady Agatha sat rigid, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Clara wept quietly, her tears a mixture of relief and sorrow. Colonel March muttered under his breath, and Simon Blackwood stared at the floor, lost in thought. Miss Harper's knitting lay forgotten, her sharp eyes fixed on Mrs. Linton, who was now slumped in her chair, face buried in her hands. Poirot, however, was not satisfied. He watched the room with a keen, almost predatory gaze, as if waiting for something more. Hastings, sensing his friend's unease, leaned in and whispered, "Is it not over, Poirot?" She confessed. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, Hastings, a confession is not always the end. Sometimes it is only the beginning." Before Hastings could reply, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Mr. Graves, the butler, appeared at the door, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot, there's been another incident. Miss Harper has collapsed in her room." The guests sprang to their feet. Poirot was the first to move, striding swiftly down the corridor with Hastings at his heels. They found Miss Harper sprawled on the floor, her knitting scattered around her. Her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy. Poirot knelt beside her, examining her quickly. "She is alive, but only just. Hastings, fetch Dr. Munro's bag from his room quickly." Hastings dashed off, returning moments later with the black leather bag. Poirot rummaged through it, selecting a vial and a syringe. He administered a dose, then turned to Lady Agatha, who had followed them. "Call for the village doctor as soon as the roads are clear. She has been poisoned, though not fatally, I think." Lady Agatha's face was pale. "But why? Who would do such a thing?" Poirot's eyes were cold. "That, madame, is what we must discover. Mrs. Linton is in no state to act, and the rest of you were together. This was done in haste, perhaps to silence Miss Harper before she could speak further." Clara, trembling, spoke up. "She said she saw Mrs. Linton in the corridor, but what if she saw someone else?" Poirot nodded. "Just so, mademoiselle. The murderer is desperate. The first crime was planned, but this was panic." Colonel March's voice was gruff. "You mean there's another murderer?" Poirot stood, his expression grave. "I mean, Colonel, that Mrs. Linton's confession was not the whole truth. She may have administered the poison, but she was not acting alone. Or perhaps she was manipulated." Simon Blackwood, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "Miss Harper was always listening, always watching. She must have known something." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Indeed, Mr. Blackwood, and someone feared what she might reveal." He turned to the group. "No one is to leave the house. I will question you all again. The real murderer is still among us, and they have shown they will stop at nothing to protect their secret." As the guests returned to the drawing-room, Poirot lingered in Miss Harper's room, searching for clues. He found a small notebook tucked beneath her pillow, its pages filled with observations, snippets of conversation, movements in the night, even sketches of the guests. One entry caught his eye. "Saw S.B. in corridor after midnight. Noticed he was carrying something. Looked like a key." Poirot's eyes narrowed. S.B. Simon Blackwood. He returned to the drawing-room, where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Poirot's voice was calm but commanding. "Mr. Blackwood, may I have a word?" Simon looked up, his face carefully blank. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." They stepped into the hall. Poirot showed him the notebook. "Miss Harper saw you in the corridor after midnight. She said you had a key. What were you doing?" Simon hesitated, then shrugged. "I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk. As for the key, I found it on the floor near the medicine cabinet. I was going to return it to Lady Agatha in the morning." Poirot's eyes were sharp. "A convenient story, monsieur, but I think you know more than you are saying." Simon's composure faltered. "You have no proof." Poirot smiled thinly. "Not yet, but the truth, it is like a shadow. It follows you, no matter how fast you run." He returned to the drawing-room, his mind racing. The web was tightening, and the real murderer was close to being revealed. Hastings approached, his voice low. "What now, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Now, mon ami, we set the final trap. The murderer has shown their hand. All that remains is to reveal their face." As the storm clouds gathered once more over Weatherbe Hall, Poirot prepared for the final confrontation. The end was near, and the truth would not be denied. Chapter 12. The Gathering. The drawing-room of Weatherbe Hall was transformed into a stage for the final act. Poirot, with his customary precision, arranged the chairs in a semicircle before the fireplace. The guests, pale and anxious, took their seats as summoned. Lady Agatha sat upright, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Clara, eyes red from weeping, clung to her recovered locket. Colonel March, jaw set, glared at the others with suspicion. Mrs. Linton, still shaken from her confession, sat apart, her face drawn and haunted. Simon Blackwood's composure was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him fidget in his seat. Mr. Drake and Miss Harper, the latter now recovering but still weak, completed the circle. Poirot stood before them, his silhouette framed by the flickering firelight. Hastings, notebook in hand, stood at his side. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "the time has come to lay bare the truth. Last night, Dr. Munro was murdered. This morning, an attempt was made on Miss Harper's life. The murderer, desperate to conceal their crime, has shown themselves by their actions." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. "Let us review the facts. Dr. Munro was poisoned with digitalis, a drug kept in Lady Agatha's locked medicine cabinet. Only Lady Agatha and Dr. Munro had keys. The poison was administered in a glass of water, delivered by Mary the maid, but anyone could have tampered with it before it reached Dr. Munro's room." Poirot turned to Mrs. Linton. "You confess to slipping the poison into Dr. Munro's water, hoping only to make him ill and drive him away from Clara. But you did not act alone, did you, madame?" Mrs. Linton shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I was persuaded. I was told it would be harmless, that it was only a sleeping draught." Poirot nodded. "And who persuaded you?" She hesitated, then looked at Simon Blackwood. "He did. He said it was the only way to protect Clara." All eyes turned to Blackwood, who paled but tried to maintain his composure. "That's absurd. I only wanted to help." Poirot raised a hand. "Enough, monsieur." Miss Harper's notebook, a hand. "Enough, monsieur. Miss Harper's notebook records that you were seen in the corridor after midnight, carrying a key. You claimed to have found it, but in truth you had already used it to access the medicine cabinet." Simon's voice trembled. "You have no proof." Poirot's eyes flashed. "But I do, monsieur. The key you returned to Lady Agatha this morning was not the original. It was a copy, hastily made. The real key was found in your room, hidden in your suitcase." Simon's bravado crumbled. I only wanted to help Clara. Dr. Munro was going to ruin her. He threatened to reveal secrets about her family, about Lady Agatha's past. I thought if he left, everything would be safe." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "So you convinced Mrs. Linton to act, using her concern for Clara. But when Dr. Munro died, you panicked. You realized Miss Harper had seen you, and you tried to silence her with another dose of poison." Simon buried his face in his hands. "I never meant for anyone to die. I only wanted to protect Clara." Lady Agatha's voice was icy. "You have done enough, Mr. Blackwood. You have destroyed what you claimed to protect." Poirot turned to the others. "The web of lies and secrets has been unravelled. Mrs. Linton, manipulated by Mr. Blackwood, administered the poison. Mr. Blackwood, fearing exposure, attempted to kill Miss Harper. The motive was not love, but fear. Fear of scandal, fear of the past." He looked at Clara, whose tears flowed freely. "You are innocent, mademoiselle. The tragedy is not yours to bear." Poirot addressed the room. "I have sent for the authorities. Justice will be done. Let this be a lesson. Secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will always come to light." The guests sat in stunned silence. the weight of the truth settling over them. Poirot, satisfied that his work was done, turned to Hastings. "It is finished, mon ami. The murderer is unmasked, and the innocent are free." Hastings nodded, admiration in his eyes. "You were right, Poirot. The truth always finds a way." Poirot smiled. His little grey cells had rest at last. "Indeed, Hastings, and now perhaps we may finally enjoy a quiet cup of tea." As the rain began to fall once more, washing away the last traces of the storm, Weatherbe Hall stood silent, a house cleansed of secrets, if only for a little while. Chapter 13. The Truth Revealed. The rain had ceased, leaving Weatherbe Hall shrouded in a gentle mist. The storm, both outside and within, had finally passed. Poirot sat in the drawing-room, the fire crackling softly as the last of the police cars disappeared down the drive. The guests, now witnesses, had given their statements. Simon Blackwood and Mrs. Linton, the conspirators, were in custody, their faces pale and drawn. Lady Agatha, her composure restored, poured tea for Poirot and Hastings. Clara sat beside her, her hand resting on her aunt's. Her eyes still red, but her expression peaceful for the first time in days. Hastings broke the silence. "It's over then, Poirot. But I still don't understand. How did you know Simon Blackwood was the true mastermind?" Poirot smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Ah, mon ami, it was the little things. The footprints in the garden, the locket, the note. These were meant to mislead, but it was the key that told me the truth. Only someone with skill and opportunity could have made a copy so quickly, and only someone desperate would risk returning the false key to Lady Agatha." Lady Agatha's voice was low. "I never imagined Simon capable of such deceit. He was a friend to the family for years." Poirot nodded. "It is often those closest to us who hide the deepest secrets. Simon feared the truth about Clara's parentage would come out, truths Dr. Monroe had discovered. He manipulated Mrs. Linton, knowing her concern for Clara, and used her as his instrument." Clara looked up, her voice trembling. "But what was the secret? What did Dr. Monroe know?" Lady Agatha hesitated, then spoke, her voice steady. "Clara, you are not my niece by blood. You are my late husband's daughter, born of a youthful indiscretion. I raised you as my own to protect you from scandal. Dr. Monroe discovered the truth when he treated me last year. He threatened to reveal it, not out of malice, but because he believed you had a right to know." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "Thank you for telling me, Aunt Agatha. I would rather know the truth." Poirot nodded approvingly. "It is always better, mademoiselle. Lies, like poison, only bring pain." Hastings sipped his tea, thoughtful. And Mrs. Linton? She truly believed she was only giving Dr. Monroe a harmless draught. Poirot's expression softened. "Yes, Hastings. She was a pawn, manipulated by Blackwood's cunning. Her guilt is real, but her intent was not murder." Lady Agatha looked at Poirot, gratitude in her eyes. "You have saved us, Monsieur Poirot. How can we ever thank you?" Poirot smiled modestly. "It is enough to see justice done, madame, and perhaps a slice of your excellent lemon cake." A ripple of laughter broke the tension. The house, so recently filled with suspicion and fear, felt lighter. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart. Clara walked them to the door, her face radiant with hope. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "You have given me my life back." Poirot bowed, his eyes kind. "Live it well, mademoiselle, and remember, always trust the truth." The great detective and his loyal friend stepped out into the fresh, rain-washed air. The mystery of Weatherbe Hall was at an end, its secrets laid bare by the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. As they walked down the drive, Hastings turned to Poirot. "A perfect ending, Poirot. 10 out of 10, I'd say." Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Ah, Hastings, but for Poirot, there is always room for improvement. Still, I am content. Justice has been served and peace restored." And with that, they disappeared into the mist, leaving Weatherbe Hall and its secrets behind.